I've been riding the Vokboard Riot Extended Range Edition for the past month or so, and there's a lot of things to love about this board, plus some things to be aware of if you're looking at purchasing it. So let's get straight into the review. So the Vokboard Riot retails for $489 US or $469 with my discount code, and this is a hub drive electric skateboard as opposed to a belt drive, and it's my first ever hub drive electric skateboard, so it's been really interesting riding this and comparing it to my old belt drive board. But first of all, let's talk a bit about the aesthetic of the board, and I actually quite like it. It's kind of understated. From the top, it's just black. It's got the black deck with the Vokboard logo and then the black wheels, which all looks really nice and clean. On the underside, you have this orange pattern, which is kind of eye-catching. I kind of like it. It's a bit of fun and definitely makes the board feel a bit more unique. In terms of the deck itself, this is a completely flat deck. It's not concave at all. And I actually kind of like this. Like, it feels different definitely to a concave deck, which I'm used to. But in some ways, it kind of feels a bit more relaxed on my feet if I'm riding for longer stretches. I'm not quite sure what the science is around that, but for me, yeah, it feels nice. It feels nice having something just flat underneath your feet. The deck is made up of Canadian maple plus some bamboo, and I feel like it's got a decent amount of flex as well. It's kind of not too flexy, but not too stiff, which is kind of how I like it. I find if it flexes too much, it can feel a little bit unsteady, and I think if it was too stiff, it might not be as comfortable to ride and wouldn't absorb the shocks as much. But I feel like this has got the right amount of flex, for me at least. In terms of the size of the deck, it's 37.5 inches long, and the interesting part is that the wheels themselves sit within the full length of the deck. So the whole 37.5 inches is the full length of the entire board. And this seems to be fairly standard for the size of an electric skateboard. It feels comfortable for me standing on it as a 6'1" guy, but I actually quite like the fact that it's not too big because it means it's a bit more portable and I feel more comfortable taking it out to, say, like a cafe or a restaurant. When it comes to the battery, I got the extended range edition. So there's a standard edition which has less range, and then has the extended range edition which obviously has more range. So this battery is rated for 432 watt hours. It's a pretty simple black aesthetic, which I don't mind. The charge port is in the center top of the board itself, and there's no battery indicator light on the board or the battery itself. The battery indicator light is on the power brick, so this will be red when the board is charging, and then it will turn green when the board is fully charged. Now, as you can see, there's a few scrapes on the battery, and I did notice due to the overall sort of low profile of the board, plus the fact that the battery itself is relatively thick and comes out a fair way, if you do go over any larger bumps, it does tend to scrape, which isn't a huge deal if you're riding on mainly flat surfaces. You just have to kind of watch out for more extreme bumps. In order to turn the board on, there's a little power button at the back near the motors, and it's got a simple little LED indicator light to tell you if it's turned on or off. Now, considering this is the extended range edition, let's talk a bit about the range. And it's rated for 40 to 45 kilometers, and I would say that's pretty accurate based on my experience. I've actually been really impressed with the battery capacity of this board, and it's honestly one of my favorite things about it. With my other boards, if I go for longer rides, I have to be a little bit more conscious about battery life, and when I bring it home, I have to make sure I always put them on charge. Whereas with the Vokboard, I've noticed that I can just kind of keep going, and I don't have to stress too much about the battery because I know that it's going to be fine. And even when I get home, sometimes I don't even plug it in to charge because I know next time I want to take it out, it should be fine. It'll still have charge to keep me going. One night I went for a longer cruise on this board for about 16 kilometers and only dropped 1 bar on the battery indicator on the remote, which was pretty impressive. All right, so let's talk a bit about the motors and the acceleration of the Vokboard Riot. Like I mentioned, this is a hub drive electric skateboard, and it's my first ever hub drive board, and I've been wanting one for quite a while. And that's partly because with my old belt drive electric skateboard, I would always have to take my backpack with me just in case I got stones or debris stuck in the belts. And this was a common thing. Even at times, belts would break and I'd have to get off my skateboard sort of mid-commute and change the belts. However, the good thing from what I know about hub drive motors is that they're generally less maintenance because they don't have the belts, so they don't get debris stuck in them, and the belts don't break, and you don't have any belts to replace. So it's actually so nice being able to jump on this board, not have to worry about my backpack. I can just go for a skate, not have to worry about any debris on the footpath or anything like that. I can just skate and have fun, and it's great. Now, each motor is rated for 600 watts of power, so you've got 1200 watts in total, and I've been pretty impressed with the performance of these motors. It's got 4 speed modes. So speed 1 is kind of like for beginners. It's pretty gentle. Then you've got speed 2, which is kind of like when you're getting used to the board. And then speed 3, I found is kind of the best mode for me personally, because this gets you all the way up to top speed. The acceleration is decent and the braking is good. Then you've got speed 4, which is kind of the turbo mode. And this gives you a bit more kick in the acceleration and the braking. But the downside of this is that I've noticed it can be a little bit jerky in speed 4, especially when I'm going a bit faster. I find it a bit harder to fully put my trust in the board because the accelerator sort of jumps and jerks a little bit as well as the braking. Whereas in speed 3, you kind of get all the benefits, including the full top speed without that jerkiness. And I think this is partly just due to the fact that it's a hub drive. From my understanding, belt drives are generally just a bit smoother. That's the way they're designed, whereas hub drives tend to be a little bit more touchy. But I think this is probably something also that Vokboard could improve on this board as well. It's just making the motors just a little bit more smooth and steady so that I can fully feel like I can trust the speed 4. But like I said, in mode 3, I think it's actually a lot of fun. You're supposed to be able to get a top speed of 46 kilometers an hour. And I found as a roughly 90 kilo person that I probably get closer to somewhere like 35 kilometers an hour. Now, obviously you might get a bit faster than that if you're lighter than me, but I've said in my previous electric skateboard videos, I don't think you need to be going faster than 40k an hour. Like, that's really fast already. Now, one thing I did notice with the speedometer on the remote was that it wasn't super accurate. When I compared it to a GPS speedometer on my phone, it tended to be around 5 to 7 kilometers out. So when it was saying I was doing 37 kilometers an hour, I was doing more like 30 kilometers an hour. So that's definitely something to be aware of and something that Vokboard can hopefully improve in the future. It's just making that speedometer a bit more accurate. Now let's talk a bit about hill climbing, because as far as I know, the Vokboard Riot isn't rated for hills at all. Like, it's not really designed as a hill climbing skateboard. And I would agree. However, I was actually pleasantly surprised because for just gentle inclines and slopes, it's actually not too bad. Especially if you've got some momentum going up already, you'll be fine. If you live in somewhere that is really more hilly, it's got sort of more steep hills, then this probably won't have the power for that. I found going up steeper inclines, the board will just end up stopping, which again is to be expected considering this isn't really designed as a hill climbing board. It's designed to be more of a commuter board for cruising, for that kind of thing, mainly in flatter areas. Now let's talk a bit about the wheels and the trucks on the Vokboard. Now it's got some standard urethane wheels and they feel okay. I wouldn't say they're the highest quality urethane wheels that I've ever seen in my life, but they do the job. They feel relatively smooth on the road. I had no problems riding on them for extended periods. It's kind of a similar story with the trucks. I found they're decent, but they do have some limitations. For example, there was a definite limitation in terms of the maneuverability of these trucks. When I lean a certain distance left or right, it will fully lock and you won't be able to turn the board any further. So it's definitely got limited maneuverability, but this isn't a huge deal when you're just out on a relatively straight path and just wanting to do some light carving. I actually still found it quite fun to just do some gentle light carving, but it definitely won't be able to get you around super sharp corners or anything like that. I also did notice that the back bushings squeaked a little bit, which again is probably not a big deal. Like, you probably just apply some grease and that will fix it, but that was just something that I noticed. Now let's talk a bit about the remote of the Vokboard. And I would say overall it's not bad. It's definitely not the best remote I've ever used in my life. It's got a finger grip, which feels kind of nice. I've got fairly big hands and it feels relatively comfortable for me. I think the thing that could be improved a bit is just the display. It's fairly basic. Like, it's got a odometer up the top, which shows you the total kilometers the board has done. Then it's got the speed indicator, which, like I mentioned earlier, isn't super accurate, but does the job. And then it's got 2 battery indicators. One on the left shows you the battery remaining on the remote, and then the one on the right shows you the battery remaining on the board. You've got the power on off button, and then you've got the speed mode button. So it's all fairly basic, but like I said, it does the job. I've got no huge complaints other than the fact that it's basic, but considering the price of the board, it's probably around what you'd expect. There's no app to fine tune the board or to update any firmware, anything like that. So the board is what it is out of the box. So let's talk about a few things that I really love about this board, and then we'll finish with some things that could be improved that I'm not such a big fan of. And the first thing that I really love is the range. The range on the extended range edition is really good. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of not having to charge my board every time I bring it home. It's really nice being able to just hang the board up and not worry about having to plug it in. And it's also really nice being able to go out for longer cruises with friends and not have to be concerned about whether or not my battery is going to die. I'm also a big fan of the fact that it's got this auto on feature. or push to start as they call it. And it's where if the board is turned off, all you have to do is put it down on the ground, push it a little bit, and then you'll hear the on noise and the board will come to life. Then you can connect the remote and you're good to go. I really like this because on one of my other boards, you have to turn the remote and the board on separately, which is kind of annoying. So it's nice to be able to just put the board down, give it a push, and then you're good to go. I also really like the size and the weight of this board. It's a fairly standard size electric skateboard, but it's on the lighter side. And like I said, I found that to be really great if I want to just take it down the street, do some grocery shopping, because carrying it around or dragging it behind me is definitely not as difficult as it is with some of my bigger, heavier boards. The board's only around 7 or 8 kilos, which I think is quite nice. Now let's talk about a few things that I didn't like as much about this board. The first is just the overall build quality is just on the lower end of the scale, and that's to be expected considering this is a cheaper option in terms of electric skateboards. But I wouldn't say it's poor quality for the price. I'd say the quality is to be expected at this price point. So I think that's something to keep in mind. If you're looking for a really high-end, high-quality board, then you obviously have to spend more money. But if you're okay with a board that's a bit lower quality, that maybe you just want to get started on, then the Vokboard I think is actually quite decent. There were a few small things that I noticed that kind of related to this, like the charger port plug feels a little bit flimsy. Some of the screws on the battery were a little loose when the board arrived, so I had to tighten them before I took it out for a ride. So make sure you check yours if you do order one of these boards. I've noticed that the Vokboard logo on the back wheels have started to peel off a little bit already, which again is not a huge deal and kind of to be expected on a lower quality board. Won't affect the ride at all, it's just something aesthetic. And then I did notice that the grip tape, especially where my back foot goes, has started to chip off a little bit already. So there's just a few things to be aware of if you are looking at buying this board. The other two things that I thought could be improved a bit was that slightly jerky acceleration in the speed 4 mode. And then I wish there was a little bit more detail on the remote. For example, having a battery percentage rather than just bars would be quite nice. And also it'd be nice for there to be an ability to update the firmware of the board, because I feel like that's something that could enable Vokboard to update that jerkiness and to improve that jerkiness just with a firmware update. But as it stands, it's not available. So in conclusion, what do I think about the Vokboard Riot ER? To be honest, I actually think for the price of this board is actually quite decent. If you're looking for something to just sort of get started in the world of electric skateboarding, you don't want to spend big money in case you don't like it, or you just want something to learn on, then I think you can definitely do worse than the Vokboard. I think it'd be great for simple commuting, and especially just for going out for cruises with friends. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions about the board in the comments section. And if you do want to buy this board for yourself, then use the code NICK at checkout, and that will get you $20 off your whole order. But before you buy anything, make sure you watch this video here where I talk about some of the most common questions that I get asked about electric skateboards. Other than that, I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you very soon in the next video.